Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to any of our podcast feeds. Have all those episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server. Follow us on our social media and streaming platforms. So over break, we're not doing any shows, but you can go to securityweekly.com/subscribe and check out all of the shows on our network, including Application Security Weekly, Enterprise Security Weekly, Security Weekly News, and so much more. Join us on January 20th to learn how to build your own security lab at home. Myself, Tyler Robinson, Mike Shima, Adrian Sanabria will be doing a live webinar on January 20th. You only need your name and email address, and I don't care if you lie, to attend this particular webcast. There are no sponsors. It's just myself and some of my illustrious hosts here on the Security Weekly Network to talk about how to build your own security lab at home. You can also check out our entire archive of on-demand webcasts available at securityweekly.com/on-demand. This is our last Paul Security Weekly of this year. We'll be taking the rest of the time off and back in January. Tomorrow, we will be doing Enterprise Security Weekly. Doug, are you going to round out the news year?
Aaron's doing it because I have a flight.
Aaron's doing it Thursday or Friday?
Tomorrow
will be the last Security Weekly
Aaron.
news.
Yep.
Crazy Aaron.
Yeah.
Let Aaron run security news.
We find the craziest
for the
people.
Last one?
Doug and Aaron, we find the craziest people that do the news. Like, they are legit crazy people.
Yeah.
That's who does the news. That's what makes the news interesting. Have you seen it?
Tenureship.
It's crazy.
That's what it's called.
It's crazy.
Hey, wasn't Paul supposed to introduce me? Hey,
Paul,
Paul,
Joff is here. Joff is here with us. Joff does fabulous training as well, and I'm glad to have you here tonight, Joff. And you're not doing anything over holiday break, I would assume. Probably moving into next year to do some of you do regex training in other C2 communications, which is awesome.
That's right. No, I'm not doing anything over the break. Actually, we're taking a little bit of time off. It's been a busy year. I got to check my schedule here to see when my next one is, and that would require some work. But we're continuing the training schedule. We've got lots of good things going on as usual with anti-Siphon Wild West Hack and Fest training. And when am I doing my next one? Oh, I got to look it up. Hang on.
I do like the format, though. I like you do half a day at a time. It's virtual, online, instructor-led. I think really that's the new way people want to consume training.
It is.
Yeah, so we do. Yeah, that's a good point. We do 4 hours a day, and I think it's a nice pace. And we do 4 days normally for most of the courses. It works really good. And then we do pay what you can training,
which is amazing.
Which are just 1 day events normally. I suck. I'm not ready for this. But let's see. I'm going to try to find the calendar here.
Well, go to blackhillsinfosec.com, navigate to training, and it'll take you there. How about that?
You will totally get that. Yeah, I'm doing regular expressions again. There you go, on February the 16th.
Nice.
That's a little ways away. Look, I got to tell you, for my 1 day, the regular expressions class has become so much fun. And people really, really love it. It's just a 4-hour thing. I cover multiple things, anywhere from Python, PowerShell, grep, sed, awk, you name it, and regular expressions fundamentals. So that's just a whole lot of fun. We had pretty good attendance at the last one I did last week. I think it was December, maybe the week before, December 14th. We had 60 or 70 people there. It was pretty good. And pay what you can, minimum $25, maximum $125. Because we ask if you're going to have your company sponsor, then, try to contribute on the upper end of that scale.
Yeah.
But if you're an individual, $25, you get to spend $25 going out for beer or three, underneath.
Right.
So, yeah, there you go.
It's good stuff. I did want to talk about the greatest exploit in the world. I kind of got reminded of like Tenacious D. Like, this is the greatest song in the world, but it's a tribute to the greatest song in the world. You guys ever seen that? It's absolutely hilarious. Because I really did, and I think it was Sinan last week that came on and had actually read this article before I did. The Citizen Lab group sent the Nso Malware. What was it called? The Nso Malware.
Yeah.
They put a name to it.
Pegasus.
Pegasus,
But
yeah.
they had another. It was another moniker. Where is the story?
Forced identity.
Forced entity?
Forced
Entity, yes.
Forced entry. Forced what? Forced something.
Forced entity, as in forced entry.
As in forced entry.
FORCEDENTY.
Citizen Lab sent that to Google Project Zero, and Google Project Zero pulled it apart and then reported those vulnerabilities to Apple. The way I understood it, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the Google article that you got to read.
Yeah.
Where is that? I'm having trouble.
If you want some very brain melding, thought provoking technical deep dives for sleeping.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is my story number 7.
Number 7. Yeah.
Yeah.
A deep dive.
It's my
into,
number 1, but my published the Security Week, which has the link to the Google article inside of it. But yes.
Forced entry. And so, I mean, I can't even begin to, like, how do you summarize this? This is just amazing in, let me try and summarize it right, like image and document processing. Like, it all stems from, like, I want to send Tyler a GIF of this funny little GIF, and it has to run in a loop, which means they need to do some kind of image processing in libraries and software in iOS, which steps outside of the sandbox. But the NSO group, this is really like a marvel in computer science, to be quite honest. Like, this is like the Endgame movie is to the Marvel MCUs we were talking about in break. Like, this is really like the Endgame. Like, I'm in awe of the computer science that went behind, not to create like software, but this was like to create an exploit. I think it's it's got to be top 5 in terms of exploitation techniques, and what they did to figure out that the way compression libraries work with JBig2, and they created a Turing complete algorithm from the compression algorithm, and then took advantage of that Turing complete algorithm and wrote their own scripting language to get ultimately a 0-click exploit in iOS. It is a marvel of computer science. It really is.
It's like a magic bit inside of a library exploit, inside of a deserialization library vulnerability.
It's tough to put a label on it.
That executes outside of the sandbox, right?
It's tough to put a label on it. Just hearing you talk, Tyler, right? Like trying to put like because it's not just a deserialization bug, right? It's not just a sandbox bypass. It's all of those. I mean, the creativity that they had to have, first of all, to do this is just
zero click in general. Like, if you talk about exploitation and you start to think about, you just need to send something that gets rendered or ingested on a computer. That's why this log4j stuff is such a big deal, right?
Yes.
Like, outside of like all the hype and whatever, it is a big deal because of the way it ingests and the systems that it touches and processes on. Same thing for this. You're talking about something that doesn't have to be engaged with by any user and is a simple serial string that gets put on any phone that you have no control over the input validation and or rendering and processing of whatever is being sent. You're essentially utilizing the underlying technology and compute libraries that are processing whatever's coming in on the SMS protocol to the preview window protocol, to the library that's rendering the image with inside of that preview window protocol that's living inside of an SMS that's going all the way past a sandbox on a phone that is highly secure, which it's crazy how they found it.
I want to read this quote because I think it deserves some study and digestion. So JBig2, which is the image process compression library, I should say, that they're taking advantage of in this process. So JBig2 doesn't have scripting capabilities, but when combined with a vulnerability, it does have the ability to emulate circuits of arbitrary logic gates operating on arbitrary memory. So why not use that to build your own computer architecture and script it? That's what this exploit does. Using over 70,000 segment commands defining logic bit operations, they define a small computer architecture with features such as registers and full 64-bit adder and comparator, which they then use to search memory and perform arithmetic operations. That's, to get an exploit, that's amazing. Like, they basically
that's stunning.
abused vulnerabilities to create their own computer architecture and scripting language to gain code execution. That is, in my 16 years of doing this show, one of the most amazing ways I've ever seen to develop an exploit. It truly is. And I'm not just saying that. Like, it is.
That's APT. Like, when we start to talk about APT and we all like put these stupid labels on it, try and map them to some MITRE framework, and we really try and think of what APT, what nation state is doing at what level. Like, this is the level at which APT typically operates at. Yes, they don't always have to operate at this, and yes, they can utilize other frameworks and tool sets for lower end operations and pass off operations. All of that happens, but this is the level at which you're dealing with when you're talking about APT. So don't take a vendor and their blinky light box that says we protect against all these APTs. That's not always the case. You are dealing with something much more sophisticated. Know your threat landscape and know what the real threat is, because you're probably not going to survive something that is targeted from an APT group.
Yeah, like I like technology, and I like to use technology responsibly, knowing that there are inherent threats to the security of that particular technology. When I read about this particular technique, it just makes me want to go off grid. I'm like, we can all agree, like, iOS is more secure than Android in its fundamental architecture. Although in the Pixel 6, Google has done a much better job of providing a much better security architecture. And I was excited about that until I read this. And I was like, you know what? All bets are off. Like, I'm just, we're screwed.
Yeah, don't become a journalist. Like, that's pretty easy.
Well, so this technology was used to very much target journalists, to Tyler's point, right? And others as well. I think that use cases aside, I'm still just astonished at the technique.
Yeah.
And that this can't be the only team or group that's doing stuff like this. I don't think
it's 100% not.
And I don't think it's the norm, but I think it's significant enough that it perhaps changes the threat landscape and threat modeling that many of us do.
I think it's an illustration of how much research funding and effort that some groups are willing to put in, because it's one thing to see it written up as an article, as an end product once people have found it and analyzed it and done all the work. But can you just imagine for a minute? I mean, I can. How much research effort went into going down this path, and how much research effort, probably 99% of these paths were thrown away to be fruitless dead ends before they reached this one area where they're like, I think we've got it. I mean, this was probably years in the making, right?
Because this wasn't theoretical, because they went from the theoretical to the practical, which I think is also what sets this apart. Because many of us might have read the research paper that said, like, you look at JBig 2, you could theoretically create your own Turing complete architecture and develop your own scripting language, and we all would have read that and go, hey, that's really cool research, but yeah, good luck making that work in practice. You read this and you go, oh wait, this was actually a very well working exploit that was, now you get into all the use cases where it was used, and we can all read about, in the popular press and Citizen Lab and many other outlets about how this was used. This is practice. But when
you start taking the resources that nation states direct at all sorts of different things, and you say, well, let's direct it at this kind of stuff.
Yep.
I mean, you can hire all the best people, and you can spend years and billions of dollars. I mean, they spend untold amounts of money trying to figure out a way to build a helicopter or something like that. So they just take that same model and they push it this direction, and then of course you're going to get crazy.
You get
things
some
like
of the
this.
smartest people with the right mindsets working on the same problem. And this, I believe you're right, Doug, is what some of the results are.
But it also highlights the fact that this will probably not be used on a regular citizen, right? Like, you don't want to burn this. You don't want this highly used and highly scrutinized. And you don't want this out in the general mass being looked at or picked up by, IPS's packet captures, ISPs, all of the things.
Right. Except it was now at this point. It was.
But you shouldn't think that you're going to be a target. Like, the U.S. government is probably not utilizing something like this again. So you shouldn't go burn all your iPhones down and stop using web services because this is out there. That's probably not your threat profile or even risk profile. Even from at a high end, you're probably not one of the people that this is going to care about. So,
no, I agree.
But you wonder how many other ones are out there that you don't know about that are out there that they're being cooked up.
It's true.
Well,
but
John's cooking shit up all the time.
But to Tyler's point, while this is a part of your threat modeling, you're probably not the target of some of
No,
this
absolutely
stuff.
not.
Yeah.
And I mean, I completely agree that they're not going to burn these things until they really, really need them, and they're going to hold them back as tight as they can because once they get exposed, they're not useful anymore. But yeah, if you're a target, watch out.
Mm-hmm. But
I think it's worth saying though, that once some of this research is published and becomes publicly known, it will open up a family of vulnerabilities that are going to be further exploited because that initial huge effort of getting over the hill of that research has been done now. Now, there's going to be a lot of copying and attempt to mimic this in other areas with probably a good deal of success.
And purging those vulnerabilities takes a lot of time. I mean, when you've got all these vulnerabilities that are fundamental parts of this equipment, getting rid of them is not just as simple as saying, well, patch this. I mean, this is a very sophisticated thing, and it's got a lot of components and a lot of ins and outs, and it's not going to just happen overnight that you get rid of these things.
But Apple did fix this?
Yeah.
This has been fixed, right?
Yeah.
If you fixed it.
They did.
If you fixed
more
all
or
that.
less.
Yeah.
More or less. So
what I'm looking at is, for a number of years, we've talked about the advanced persistent threat, and have we seen the A-team yet? This exploit's kind of head and shoulders over what we've seen. And
this is
kind of cool to see
A-team, right?
where their abilities are.
It's like something that would come out of Lawrence Livermore or somewhere.
I mean, if it's not the A-team, I'm really afraid. I mean,
I think you could look at compare it to Stuxnet, but Stuxnet was more of a glimpse into the A-team of the operations of what the malware was doing rather than how it got there in the exploitation techniques. To me, the exploitation techniques, even if there were there were 0 days, right, that they used, to me, more of the marvel of Stuxnet was how it interacted to affect change in the real world, not so much like the actual exploitation technique, which changed, a few times.
The unattributable side of this and the nature of blatantness that, like, this is detectable. You, again, from an A-team standpoint, you talk about some of the nation states and, like, really critical operations. Even this would be outside of their purview and level of comfort for deployment. So, yes, this is definitely A-team material where they may use something like this, but this is commercial. There's a lot more red tape and a lot more considerations that go into some of the more sophisticated malware, such as like Stuxnet. You see some of the level of scrutiny and use cases where they have to start to be more noisy, but even then, it is not at the level of this where it doesn't get that kind of scrutiny.
If this gets me, this particular exploit gets me, I'm honored. It's almost like that thing you see in samurai movies where they're fighting someone and they die by their sword, and they're like, I'm honored to have fought such an adversary that had a skill level, right? It's the same in like mafia movies where they have to do a hit on someone and they're like, you pulled off this hit, and they're like, there's actually a story in the podcast Hour thing with Sammy the Bull Gravano where he has to do a hit on someone, And the mafia guy that they capture is kind of like, I'm actually really impressed that you pulled this hit off the way that you did, and I will comply and die honorably, and have you kill me. But like, he's like, I'm kind of really impressed that you got me. Like, they were in a mafia war. He was heavily protected, and he pulled off this hit, grabbed him in a van, and the whole thing, right? Like, that's kind of feeling successful. Like, if you use this against me, I'm like, I'm kind of honored. Like, that, you got me, man. Like, that's amazing.
So not Log4j then.
No, Log4j. I mean, that's like, that's
you're not honored to be hit by Log4j.
No,
I have to tell you,
because that's your typical open source supply chain kind of attack that many people.
It is like the worst case possible. It is like the worst storm at the worst time in history across so many vendors that you literally, I don't know if you could have thought out something worse than like SolarWinds. We thought was pretty bad. This, I think, trumps SolarWinds.
I think it's worse,
much worse.
But I also, I commend the Blue Mirror team for discovering, applying the WebSocket technique. My kind of attitude in thinking about the WebSocket technique is the WebSocket technique can be applied to really any web application vulnerability. The WebSocket technique is just a pivot point, right? Tyler, am I not like a...
I mean, Outlook Home homepage attack is a great example of
yes.
Like, WebSockets is fucking everywhere and will cause shenanigans.
WebSocket is the catalyst for web application attacks. It makes
it's going to happen.
It's like it makes those remote code execution vulnerabilities, local privilege escalation in that realm with WebSockets, crap that's exposed to the internet. It can be local and you can access it via WebSockets. And again, I'm not knocking. The Blue Mirror team did a great write-up on it, and I commend them for pointing it out, and I think they deserve all the credit in the world. I just want people to think that, like, that's specific to Log4j. That's really like, and not, I shouldn't say any. Many web application attacks you can pivot from WebSockets.
And I think you're right. I think this is just the start of what Log4j is kind of pivoting to. You look at all of the libraries and input ingestion fields or libraries that handle those input ingestions that deal with something like WebSockets, and all of the applications, appliances, vendors that utilize those. We're going to see more Log4j this year in whatever format, I think, than we'll ever see.
I would say it a slightly different way. First of all, we need to point out loudly to everybody that WebSockets are not constrained by same origin policy, which is
right.
A big deal.
Isn't that amazing? You wonder
it's a big deal.
Like, how is that ever a thing? Like, to me, that should have never been a thing from a security standpoint.
I mean, I don't know how we got from here to there,
right,
to that point, but the second major factor, and I've seen this in other software, and I've even found 0 days in pen testing from time to time, and that is in the area of Java object serialization and deserialization. If you attach Java object deserialization to a WebSocket, you're kind of standing in the street and dropping your pants.
Yep.
And it comes down to what Tyler was just saying. Doing very, very careful filtering at trust boundaries, and this is where serialization and deserialization is such a big deal, it's critically important. And I think the other thing that factors into this is in the world of Java, I have encountered, and I know plenty of other pen testers that have, applications which have multiple different versions of the same library code installed in the same application without any consistent versioning, without any. I mean, it's a nightmare.
Well, when you look at microservices architecture, you could have different components of your web application that are all running different versions, that are all packaged differently, and they're all talking over APIs, but they're essentially all iterations of different libraries that could have the same, maybe similar, or different vulnerabilities.
And not just Java, though. Like we keep bringing this down to a level. I think we're micro analyzing what this is. Like you look at the macro side of this, like deserialization in general and input fields that talk back to logs, databases, rendering engines, all of the things that web applications, WebSockets actually interact with outside of even Java Like, this is going to be probably systemic, and this is something that we've seen, and we've, from a web app standpoint, like, we've been hammering on this for a while. Anything that gets serialized and deserialized, that's a problem and can be a risk. Now we're just going to see more and more things getting scrutinized because these libraries and integrations have not been heavily looked at, especially like open source is one, but then you start to look at some of the closed source things and where these applications are talking to and integrating with. Not just integrating with their own software, but across vendors, across platforms, across services, across SaaS and single sign-on integrations.
Yeah.
This is a pretty bad day.
Yeah, right. Trust boundary stuff, right? And it's the same old stuff. That's the sad part about it. It's just it's another day. It's the same old trust boundary issue. We've seen it inside systems. We're now seeing it across systems. We're now seeing it across virtualized containers across systems. It's the same old problem, ultimately.
It's just like RMI, right? Like we were worried about RMI and deserialization a while. We've been abusing that for 5-6 years. Now we're seeing that deployed in containers on platforms in SaaS and back to logging and within libraries. Like, this is just something that is the next extension of whatever that is.
I think it paints a whole new light on input sanitization, because traditionally, I think security people and developers, we harp on input sanitization, but we look at you take that input and you're putting it in a database in that SQL injection, right? I think a lot of the exploitation vectors, you're putting that data in a log, or you're putting that data in an image manipulator. Like, whatever that back-end process is, you have to protect the data that's going into it. You have to sanitize that input, regardless of where the output is going, because it could quite frankly be where that output is being processed, some exploitation vector. Tyler, I thought you did a really good job of saying, like, that could be an image manipulation, that could be a database, or that could be a log. Like, that data is getting processed somewhere in the back end. It's not always a database.
But you're asking developers to do a thing that they haven't been asked to do.
It's a big ask, Doug.
I agree. Yes. My job as a developer forever and ever was
shit work.
Make it work.
Yep.
And I say, well, here's a happy little tool I can use to make this thing work, like Log4j, and I stick it in my app. Well, all of a sudden, there's this mesh of stuff that's scattered all over the place, and you're basically asking this poor development team to try to evaluate and assess unbelievable numbers of things and understand how they all work together and make sure that they don't work together in any inappropriate ways. Right. And I mean, I'm not saying it's an ask that shouldn't be done. I'm just saying.
No, but like, you're asking developers to separate data and logic. But most developers are getting a library. It's whoever wrote that library that has to separate the data.
And that library may have a library inside of it, which may have more libraries inside of that. And all that stuff, when you dump that on the dev team and go, okay, you got to go through and analyze all this, and then, there's this other proprietary library over here that you're using that you can't even look inside of. And it just gets weird. And I mean, I can just imagine trying to deal with that, like when I was a developer, and like thinking, I got to make this work. It's due on Friday. And
look at the time, Doug. Can you just push that to production now?
Yeah, we bumped that up to a green, so it needs to be done in the next 24 hours. And I'm going, I can either try to go through all these libraries and deconstruct them and understand what they're doing, or I can just use them and hope they work okay.
I mean, or you could write it yourself.
Yeah, sure.
But that's why we have. But that's why we have libraries. That goes back to the origins of programming.
Yeah.
When I was reading the book "Hackers: Heroes of the Computer Revolution" by Stephen Levy. One of the first, it like kind of struck me in computer science history, sharing code and using libraries. And literally, they would write a program on punch cards, and then they would leave the punch cards in the drawer. Yeah. And if you needed to recreate that portion of your program, you would go to the drawer and get the punch cards out.
We did that all the time. Yes. I mean, we had folders of stuff that were subroutines.
Yes.
That were things that were done all the time, and you pulled all that stuff together. And I remember taking subroutines off of punch cards and putting them on tape, because we didn't need the punch cards anymore. And I'd take the punch card reader in the basement and make a tape out of it, and then feed that into my program. And so it was just we had these standard templates of stuff that had to happen, and nobody knew how a lot of that stuff worked. It was like, I mean, I had stuff, I don't know how it worked.
It's interesting. This isn't a new problem. It's
always
the way we've developed software.
We were responsible for that. It was just, there was a big difference. Nobody could get to it. It was in a building. in a place, and nobody could get to that stuff. It was isolated, but it's not anymore. And so when I run these, but that same mentality is still there, because we've been doing that same thing after it went from punch cards to tape to hard drives to flash drives to I got a folder, I got something on GitHub.
Funny, you don't learn in school when you're learning to write software how to necessarily do things securely, but what you are taught is to write things once and reuse it.
Yeah.
Like, that's like my first programming class I ever taught. They're like, hey, if you write some software, like, no need to write that every time. You make it a subroutine.
And
or
remember,
a library,
even if
or
it's
a
shit,
function,
if
or a
it
method.
works, it doesn't matter if it's shit as long as it works. Because if you go to your supervisor or your systems analyst and you say, this whole part here, we should probably rewrite this. It's kind of clunky. They're going to go, but it works, right? And you go, well, but it's kind of clunky.
You know what the interesting thing is in software architecture is once you task a developer to say, I want you to write this library function or method and spend a lot of time and think about it and make it work. And when it does, you see an increased adoption of that. Mm-hmm. And then so much other software depends on that that you're like, yeah, but like Doug, I did that on like a weekend, and like I had some really good ideas,
and I was drunk,
and I was drunk, and I wrote it, and like it works, and now all these people are using it, and I'm like, I don't know, and like our manager comes over and is like, well, that's awesome, it's working, like don't change it,
yeah,
because then we have the regression test.
I'm not giving you hours for going in and rebuilding all this stuff that already works, and we know it works,
and that's one of the ways we end up in the mess that we're in today.
Yes, it is.
And how much commercial software actually ends up that way because of that?
They do the exact same thing. I mean, I assure you they do. Because if you've got something and it's a library, it's like a print spooler. It works. Nobody wants to take the time to redo it and develop a new one and try to test that on a myriad of systems and platforms. So they just keep using the same one.
Yep.
Yeah. Speaking of Windows, like Log4j is pretty bad and all, but honestly, I don't think Log4j is as bad as the two Windows exploits that were released and modified this week.
Holy crap! Which one? So I've got ones that are.
I think it's your story 14.
Yeah, Active Directory bugs let hackers take over Windows domain controllers. 2021 42278 enables attacker to tamper with SAM account name attribute, which is used to log a user into systems in the Active Directory domain. 2021 42287 makes it possible to impersonate the domain controller.
Yep.
Effectively, it grants a bad actor with domain user credentials to gain access as a domain admin user. It's that last sentence there that really caught my attention.
It is effectively domain user to domain admin with very little visibility, and within every environment Active Directory currently employed now.
Yeah.
So you can essentially request
So sorry, Tyler. It's the combination of those two vulnerabilities that allow me to go from domain user to domain admin.
Yes, it's the combination of the two, but they are two separate issues. The combination of the two allows the full path to happen. Essentially, what you're doing is you're able to change an attribute for the SAM account name, which is kind of the simple name within inside of Active Directory. You're able to add or change a SAM account computer object. So any user can typically, by default, change this attribute on a computer object
what
is
a SAM account?
To it.
The SAM acronym has been in like Windows architecture forever, right? That's what does that stand for? It's been so long since I've done Windows stuff.
The same account name is SAM.
Yep.
So your same account name is like the simple name within inside of Active Directory. SAM
that represents a user or computer object.
It's like a hash, right? That represents an object.
It's like an object ID.
It's any object within inside of Active Directory, right? Like this can be so SAM account name is kind of the same account name for usually user account objects and computer account objects. In this case, it's for backwards compatibility in Windows NT 95, 98.
Yeah, like it has deep roots.
It's part of LAN manager. If you think of LAN hashes, this same account name SAM account is an attribute that applies to Active Directory for backwards compatibility. You're able to manipulate this name, put a $ hash within it, and any user can utilize this. But essentially, you can enumerate the domain controllers, figure out what the name is, change the SAM account name to a domain controller with a $, make a ticket, request a ticket granting ticket from the domain controller, get back that ticket granting ticket, revert the changes to the SAM account name, and then pass that ticket so that it gets signed saying, hey, this was signed by the domain controller, and you can utilize that to then have a ticket that is parsed and valid without the validation of whether that came from the domain controller or that was requested by a user. And so you can utilize this to forge tickets and then do something like
you
a
inject
DC
the server essentially.
So you get a domain, you get a ticket that gives you domain admin. As
it says this is a valid server in this Active Directory domain.
A domain controller. You're essentially impersonating the domain controller.
And then that updates. So because it sees that as valid, it's going to pass along all the information to it.
Because it does. It's almost like a DLL environment variable path thing. So it looks through and says, okay, hey, this ticket doesn't have this field for the computer name, but it has a SAM account name, which is the DC. So therefore, it is the DC that sent this, and that's a valid ticket granting ticket. It needs to be signed now.
Right. That's awesome.
So that
is scary.
Once again, you can die with honor.
Yep.
Yeah, at any point, anybody that has access to Active Directory right now, like if you're a low-level malicious adversary, you've only had this user account and you're trying to figure out how to elevate privileges, escalate, laterally move. You don't have to do any of that now. You can just go straight to domain admin. So any presence inside of any network right now provides you domain administrator.
It doesn't matter whether my AD is in Tyler. It doesn't matter if my AD is local or it's Azure AD. It's all the same.
Yep.
Doesn't matter
in this case, right?
Yep.
Sweet. I've got a thing coming up in January. Just asking for a friend. I'm going to get that POC tool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. Nice.
It's available and rolled into many tools now too. So bad day.
That could be a good day for me in January.
Sort of related to Log4j and sort of related to the NSO exploit, right? The Chinese government suspends a deal with Alibaba for not sharing Log4j 0-day with the government.
That's amazing. That's hilarious.
This is really scary. I mean, we talked about a zero-click exploit in iOS, which is scary. Log4j in itself is scary. This is really freaking scary, actually, because basically what the Chinese government is saying is, if you find a vulnerability, you got to report it to us first. And the Chinese government's only going to use that for good, right? Maybe for the good of the Chinese government in the Chinese
it shows
country,
the level of influence that the Chinese government has, right? Like the level of influence they have over companies and their ability to put pressure on them to disclose things prior to it being fixed, patched, or even disclosed to the public. It goes pretty deep, and people don't realize our Western mind has a hard time grasping the concept of the state and state first and country first from a communist standpoint, and the ability for them to control even business at this level. So we really have to adapt our brain to understand this.
So this says, Tyler, this move also comes months after the Chinese government issued new stricter vulnerability disclosure regulations that mandate software and networking vendors affected with critical flaws to disclose them firsthand to the government authorities mandatorily. I mean, what that means is, if you're in China, Chinese. Right? If you're in China, if you're a Chinese citizen, Chinese company, if you find a vulnerability, it sounds like in anything, doesn't have to be Chinese software. You find a vulnerability in anything, right? Log4j was not Chinese software. That was open source software by the Apache Foundation. You find a vulnerability in anything, you are mandated by the government to disclose that to the Chinese government first.
Yes.
Holy shit, is that scary?
Yeah. 100% they passed that last month, and I mean, they're basically, I think it was last month, and they're basically saying, yeah, you have to tell us so we can take advantage of it before you disclose it.
That may be one of the scariest things put out there by a government.
I agree.
You think about that from our side, okay, we ban, Howie or whatever it's called. We start to ban these Chinese products. That doesn't include integrators, that doesn't include chips, that doesn't include things that researchers in China find that have to be disclosed to the government first. That puts everything at risk. And now, like, China's been a huge threat. This just mandates all of the research and intellectual capability that China has into a function of the government that is super terrifying.
What do you think happens to the person that finds a vulnerability and doesn't report it to the Chinese government first? Right?
They disappear.
Can you say Uyghurstein?
You go bye-bye.
You end up working in a radioactive tractor factory in Uyghurstein.
Yeah.
That's probably right.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky, yeah. If you're not lucky,
I was going to say, that's if you have
transfer
some pool.
They just take you to that maximum security prison I drove past that time. It's like, where you do the hard labor until you die.
No, they put you in Wuhan, and they put you at one of those landfills, and you are cleaning up material that shouldn't be in Wuhan.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what they've effectively done is just put all that decent security researchers on the government payroll. I mean, that's effectively what's happened here, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've created a bug bounty. It's a bug bounty, but there's no bounty
for the government.
Yeah, there's no bounty.
Yeah.
I don't think they're compensating you for that.
I'm not going to lie with their approach. Like, honestly, it's from, if I was running a nation state, like
a totalitarian government
approach.
like China, why wouldn't you do that?
When Tyler and I open up our town called Cyberville, that's the way we would do it.
That's how I would run it.
Makes sense.
But ours is going to be a benevolent dictatorship.
Of course you are.
Of course.
Yeah.
I can see big 30-foot tall pictures of Joff everywhere. And
it's such a sharp contrast to how the U.S. works, right? Like, I've literally been in meetings where research teams have found vulnerabilities, and like owners of the company have been like, so like, what do you want to do with it? Like, you want to sell it? Like, you want all the credit for it? Like, what do you want to do with it? Like, ultimate like freedom and choice to be like, how do you want to do this? Like, you did all the work to find this vulnerability, so
that's so American, though,
right? Like, let's talk about how we want to deal with it, right? Versus China, where it's like, if you find something, you got to report it to the government. Like, no other option. It is what it is.
So do these vulnerabilities end up living longer because no one wants to report it and deal with the government bureaucracy of ending up in the limelight of something and having to then produce later on? Or not say anything because they don't want the government to have it and use it for evil, but they don't want to report it and get disclosed. So do these vulnerabilities just live?
I mean, I think I could definitely see. I mean, it's almost a Sovietsky kind of thing, where you're like, you didn't see this vulnerability didn't exist. We're going to pretend we never noticed it because nobody wants to draw that spotlight over in their direction.
It's Mussolini all over, man.
So in China, you would have to weigh all the outcomes of this to decide, do we see it or do we not see it? Because if we don't see it, then we didn't report it. But if we report it, it's going to be, and is it our fault? And the government's going to come down on us for that. So there's going to be all this sort of weighing of whether these things should be disclosed or not. And
it's Schrodinger's box for vulnerability.
It is
like bounties,
right? Because you're eventually it's going to get caught in the wild, and you're going to be like, oh wait, like,
we didn't know
China had this 0 day. Like, how long have they had that? What did they use it for?
And then do you get killed later for not finding that and discovering it beforehand?
Well, that's the way. That's the weighing part I'm talking about. So you have to weigh, like, will I be killed now or will I be killed later? What's the upside? Do I get something good for reporting this, or am I going to get shot in the head? Or later because you didn't disclose it. So it's going to be and then that turns into how much juice do the people that run your company have?
Right. If it's Huawei, like, you're probably
because then the government can just hang on to that and wait for that day when you cross somebody and they go, "Oh, you should have disclosed this. Now you're out." And then
it's ultimate leverage. It's a power play. It's a huge power play.
It's the most complicated chess game there ever was.
Right.
Well, look, here's the only thing I hope. I hope that some very smart people in various agencies of the U.S. government are paying attention, because you talk about something that should force us to break the supply chain in several areas. This is it.
Yes.
Right. This is absolutely it. I mean, we should like snip the cord on many things, and we probably have already. There's just not things that are necessarily public, but I suspect there will be things that'll come out public.
I mean, there are there are manufacturers of chips and hardware that only make it for the U.S. government. I believe correct me if I'm wrong, that does exist today. We do have the ability to manufacture our own computer chips and hardware. Largely, those are, I think, almost 100% contracted by the U.S. military and government. Is that true? Tyler's shaking his head, yes.
At scale, yes. At the level at which R&D happens and is mass produced to general public, no.
Yes, it's for the U.S.
That's the issue.
And then somebody brings a Wi-Fi enabled fire extinguisher on the base, and then all bets are off. So,
but we do have those capabilities, but they only service U.S. military. Am I getting that right? From what I understand.
I would say certain U.S. military applications, right? Like you talk about like a chip in an F whatever bomber is the latest, or drone. Yeah, most of those are produced inside of a supply chain that's controlled by the government or certified. I wouldn't necessarily say it's all in the U.S.
Be awesome to have a government program that is kind of sponsored by the companies doing that for the U.S. military to go like, here's how you manufacture chips. Like, let's start doing this in our own country, right? And
so you run into political issues with that, right? Like the problem with this goes back to things like vaccines, right? Like all of the prescription RX, like the mass production of those is handled out of India. Most of those are subsidized in India, shipped under name brand to the U.S. The non-name brand is subsidized to low poverty companies under different names in India and given out to even more rural populations underneath of other brands. So you end up with this political thing of, hey, if you take away and move your production of prescriptions to, say, something like the U.S. only, or Puerto Rico, where we have mass RX production, and take it out of India, are you saying you're not going to help the third world and you're now cutting off supplies for vital prescriptions to third world countries, even though we've found that most of the prescriptions are being tainted, sliced, ineffective because they're not producing at a high quantity or high quality value as they're supposed to for quality, and we can't get inspections because they're outside the U.S. So we're trying to bring those in country, but we're also losing a political battle of, killing the rest of the world because we're not keeping it at a place that can subsidize it later from the production of where we're doing it. So there's a lot of political games being played, not just in chips, but you talk about prescription, vaccine, high-tech manufacturing, rare earth metal mining. All of these things come into play at a geopolitical standpoint that is well outside of just, hey, we need to be able to produce this and manage this in-house.
Yeah, because you still need to source the raw materials from somewhere, too. That's a great point, Tyler, right? Go ahead, Jeff.
My open question is this, right? Assuming that there is a split in semiconductor manufacturer already, where there are certain suppliers that are only allowed to supply high security agencies in the U.S. government, and the consumer market is still fed by China, which I think that's the way it is.
Yeah, agreed.
How soon is the corporate sector going to say, well, wait, we're buying largely off of the consumer market, and we're seeing this news out of China. We don't want to do that anymore. And that's going to actually raise the issue.
Those are board meetings that happen at Apple, right? And I've heard other podcasts talking about that. And I don't know how much this is true. I was listening to Joe Rogan, and there seems to be some evidence that there manufacturing plants in China where the working conditions are so poor that workers will jump from the window and try and fall to their death. And their solution to that was to put nets in. So like Apple kind of sits in their boardroom and is like, well, you only use factories that have nets. And I'm like, this is not like a moral discussion that I would want to be having as an Apple board member, right? Like there are deplorable working conditions in these factories in China. But to Tyler, to your point, there's so much that goes into that. Yeah, then you miss your number.
Do you miss your production numbers?
Oh,
do you miss the holiday season of whatever the latest design is and your board's expectation of revenue in order to make those moves? Those are slow moves that happen.
Right.
And it's not just a slow move from a production standpoint. It's a slow move from your ability to geopolitically handle it, move those productions, and have processes in place to move a large organization to the point where to do
Joe
that.
Rogan Joe Rogan was suggesting along these lines, and this is just creative thinking. I don't know. I agree with it if it would work, But he's like, have the US made phone that's like $2,000 and have the Chinese made phone, which is like $800, right? So like if you really want to support the US, you buy the $2,000
That's what they do with
phone,
guitars.
Right? But at some other industries,
but no, I mean, if you go like almost all the big guitar manufacturers, they have like a Gibson guitar that's made in the United States. It costs like $4,000.
Sure.
They have another version of it that's made in Korea or somewhere that costs like $2,000, and they have a Chinese made version of it that costs like $1,000.
Yeah.
And it does let the consumers decide what they're willing to accept.
And what does it mean for us in the pen testing industry?
That all supply chains are tainted, and we're all going to have to deal with this for the next 10 years because there's not a geopolitical stance that we can combat with a technological problem. This is human.
I agree.
Let me put it a different way. The system that I'm talking on right now is compromised.
Yes.
100%. In one sense or another, like all communications have been broken to an extent. All applications and or platforms are being monitored from one extent to the another. Like it's whether or not your threat vector and threat profile is warranted of a caliber that they're going to do anything with it and or be able to analyze the data in a meaningful manner to, produce meaningful and actionable intelligence.
Right. Compromised at a very low level. I'll even rephrase that, right? As at a firmware level.
I would say at a cable level. Like
So, I mean,
cables,
that means
firmware,
China knows what kind of porn you watch, Joff. Just throwing that out
They
there.
do.
Oh, well, good luck to them.
No one else wants to see that. But some other getting back into physical pen testing, which is kind of interesting. We did talk about. I don't know how much of it was on air, but I don't think we talked about this on air. There's a grade 1 physical lock from Schlag. Did I say that right?
Schlag.
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 However you say that. Grade 1's $400. It's the OC 100? Did I get that right?
It's the CO 100.
CO 100. Sorry, CO 100's $400 retail. If you read through this entire long Bloomberg article, which makes a few different deviations, basically talks about all these like lock pickers that have these YouTube channels and are very famous in like Reddit forums and stuff like that, which I'm not knocking what these people do. Whoever wrote the article was very verbose and took it in all the different directions. Basically, a security researcher got hold of one of these $400 high-grade security locks, and after 2 hours, realized they could modify a zip tie to be inserted into the drain hole plug, right? Because these locks are rated like you can leave them outside. I think it survives up to 5 minutes with a metal grinder, like something like the ratings are like ridiculous, right? And that may not sound like a big deal, like I can spend you have to sit there with a noisy mechanical tool
sparks
that's emitting
everywhere.
Sparks flying everywhere for 5 minutes to cut through it. Like 5 minutes is a lot longer than you think when you're trying to breach.
That's like an hour safe, honestly. That's a pretty big comparison. You look at that from a lock standpoint. That's like an hour fire safe.
Like if someone's going to steal my bike, 5 minutes is a long time with a power tool to be sitting there to steal it or get into a door, right? So that's how these locks are touted. But within a few seconds, he's got this homemade little zip tie thing that goes in and pulls the mechanism. In electronic locks, there's a mechanism, right, that can make it go unlocked, right?
It's a vulnerability in almost all electronic locks, and this is something the drain plug vulnerability is not something new, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, Devian was saying that before the show, right? The drain plug is necessary because this relates to me because I've got some locks on a lot of my outdoor facilities at my house, right? And if you buy, I balance that usability versus security. And sometimes you buy a lock and I put it on there, and a couple of weeks, the thing's rusted out, and I got to replace it. And I'm like, that was great because it had a keypad or it had the rolling keypad kind of thing,
cylinder,
the cylinder, right, with the code. I'm like, it's great. I don't have to carry a key around. So practically, carrying a key is a pain in the ass because you lose a key, the key is in a different location or whatever. I need to go to my shed, I need to get in, but the lock I bought isn't rated for outdoors, right? So the drain hole is a thing, but this was bypassed pretty easily. I guess Schlag fixed it, but still, it's a pretty good article.
Yeah, it's a common vulnerability in most of these, and the drain plug attack is not new by any means, which is funny. It's still in here. But you look at something like a safe, right? You have to have power to the keypad. If you look at the electronic safes, they're almost all vulnerable to some form of solenoid abuse, some form of power reading abuse, where the power has to be externally be available in case the power dies to it. You got to hook an external battery so you can read up-down voltages. All of these things are usability, functionality, and the ability for the user to gain access to this should something go wrong. So again, nothing new here, unless you're talking about something like one of Medco's locks. These vulnerabilities are going to exist in most of the electronic locks, most of any of the padlocks, or you look at any master locks. There's always a bypass available. You watch any YouTube channel, follow any of the lock picks. Like, there's ways to get around most systems, unless you're spending an exorbitant amount of money on physical security. There's ways around this. You even look at biometrics. Like, we can easily bypass that because of the back-end backhaul data that's transmitting over a legacy protocol like Wigan that can be intercepted and relayed, replayed, and or intercepted.
But also,
like,
in my case too,
susceptible.
In my case too, Tyler, and in a lot of other situations, I'm sure you've seen that the lock is attached to something else that is more easily bypassed and or cut than the lock itself, which is an interesting security. In other words, I've got a chain that I can cut with my bolt cutters, right? But the lock takes me 5 minutes with an angle grinder. Like, I'm going for the path of least resistance in physical security.
Or the chain link that's like 2 feet next to all that doesn't leave a hole, right? You can zip tie chain link 5 feet from the gate and nip that with a set of $5 nippers.
Yeah, it's the weakest link. It's the same thing in a pen test. How do I get domain admin? Oh, this new exploit is the weakest link, right? It's like, what's the weakest link in the physical security? Yep.
One of my takeaways from the first time I heard Deviant talk was he says, yeah, I know lockpicking and I can teach you how to lockpick, but these days you don't need it because the weakest link isn't the lock. It's the badly fit things around it, so you can pop the door open.
You know what's funny?
The window.
Well, you know what's funny? So Christmas Eve, right? My brother-in-law rents the space in his apartment complex for us to have a party, and they don't want you messing with the thermostat. So they've got that plastic housing,
right,
with the lock on it, right?
Right.
And so the first time I walked up to him, I'm like, I'm gonna use my lock picking skills, and I picked the lock, right? And then I don't know if I like.
Then there's a hole cut in it, and you could put a paperclip in and push the button.
Why didn't you just stick a plastic knife through the slot and adjust it?
So there's the thing, right? Like, after the first time I picked it, I don't know if I wore down something. It was harder to pick the second time because I wanted to relock it to show that I was never there and not damage anything. And I'm like, I can't pick it the second time. I'm like, but if I just bend the plastic a little bit, like, I can totally open it, right? Like, I might need a tool to just bend the plastic just enough so that the latch doesn't really latch anymore and I can just lift it up. And I'm like, and again, imagine that.
That goes back to Deviant's point. Like, all the engagements I've done with Deviant, like even the engagements we've done, like, outside the country, majorly secure organizations, very high, like armed guards, the whole 9 yards. Like, all of these, typically we're doing these within a suit. I've got a nice tie on, nice suit, blending in. I have very limited gear on me. I'm utilizing something like a piece of paper under my armpit to get past the entry point. I'm using things like whatever I can find in the garbage as far as a piece of plastic to use as, a shove stick or any form of bypass tool. We're not leveraging lockpicks or sophisticated
And you know
gear.
what's amazing, Tyler?
The most sophisticated gear is ESP key.
Tyler, you're amazing at lockpicking. Deviant has taught tons of people about lockpicking. He's the lockpicking expert. And what you're saying is when you guys go on physical pen tests together, you don't often use lockpicking, and you're two of the best lockpickers that I know. Which is
we still
astonishing
golf carts and drive around in them.
Right.
Because, the keys are in there.
So true. The other thing, along these lines, right, bypassing metal detectors, which I thought was interesting because I was like, oh, there
this
must
one's
be.
Awesome.
But I was thinking of it like you find, like you were saying, Tyler, you're on with Deviant, you're doing a physical pen test, and you're finding stuff in the trash or laying around to like get into something. I'm like, there must be some kind of physical mechanism, something I put on my person that hacks the metal detector. This is almost the complete opposite, where the friggin' metal detectors are IoT devices that are on the network. And guess what?
Wow.
They've got firmware that's like exploitable, and you can get to them over the. So the this line of metal detectors, Garrett is the company. It's an IC module.
It's a PD6500.
PD6500 is the model, right? You use a tablet or a laptop that gives you the telemetry and all the user interface, and it connects over the network to the metal detector. But if you connect directly to the metal detector, guess what? You can make configuration changes, alter the sensitivity of the device, which essentially would let you bypass the metal detector, which is scary.
Or those devices live on local networks that are accessible outside of the secure zone, and or you have access to the touchpad while you're trying to go through security. Like, all these things exist as like stupid ways you end up getting past these kind of things.
Yep.
So I'm flashing back to my trip to Egypt a couple weeks ago. Everywhere we went through metal detectors, and there was two scenarios that were very common. One, the results of the metal detector were just ignored.
Yep.
You went through and it beeped or it didn't. The other, which was at the airport, whether it beeped or not, you got the full pat down. The beeping
Didn't
was just
matter.
whether you got wanded and patted down or just patted down.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these were really more almost a massage, the way they were checking us out. So there are countermeasures, but yeah. No,
it's because you were wearing that sweater. I would massage you too.
But Lee,
come on.
Lee, I like the scenario where like everyone goes through the metal detector, and it's really just an indicator of what countermeasures are put in place once you walk through it, right? Like everyone gets a pat down, but like if you set the metal detector off, then there's the wand that happens as a result. And also
that goes
we've learned from Israel too
yourself.
that security is not just about these devices and technology. Security is about profiling. And I think Egypt and a lot of the countries in other places in the Middle East, they're more about profiling and training people to look at people, to talk to people, and make that assessment about a threat, right? And that not so much relying on the technology.
Right? Like,
yeah.
And
technology covers a certain aspect of it. You wear a suit, you look the part, you feel the part, but like something is off. As a good agent, if they pull you aside, they will probably find something because they keyed in on something. If you look the part and you're getting through that level of scrutiny and you're doing your side of it, which you should be, you have nothing to hide, you're able to talk very freely, very cleanly, you look the part, you
Back
act
to my
the part,
conversation with the
you
TSA agent in Louisville, Kentucky. What is this? I'm like, that's a lockpick set. That's for picking locks. Okay, like the fact that I was like, without hesitation, I was like, that's what it is. I'm not trying to hide anything. Like, I'm telling you that's what it is. You need to take it. You need to take it. That's totally fine. Like, I'm all for safety. We can sit here and debate the laws, but like, really, you want to do your job, keep people safe, and I want to get on my flight. And that lockpick set that I keep in my bag pretty much at all times cost me about $12. So like, whatever, right? Like, it's just there in case I need it to get into something that I own or I have permission to lockpick.
Like
right?
say the metal detector.
Right? As you need to take it, right? Like the lockpick set that I keep in my bag is basically disposable for that reason. If I need it in the course of doing my job and traveling to get into something that I need to get into, like the cash box needed to be picked, and I have my lockpick set. My only stipulation is like the case that it comes in was from like Hackers for Charity and like handcrafted in Uganda that I bought. Like, let me keep the case. You can take the lockpicks. I don't care about those. I just want to keep the case. That's it. And that's what I keep in my bag.
Yeah, look the part, act the part, feel the part, and present no risk. You will often talk your way out of most situations and or be able to continue an engagement without the use or need of any other propaganda, your letter, get out of jail free. Like, have a good backstory, understand how to talk to people and the psychology behind it, and just be a good human. Most of the time, it's very rare that anybody is going to do confrontation.
Right. What else we got? Bugs and billions of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chips. I thought this was interesting when we think about a SOC, right? Not a SOC that is doing threat hunting or analysis of events, but a system on a chip. this was interesting because what this research highlighted was that the SoC that typically has the functions for like the CPU compute for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth shares common resources such as the antenna and also shared memory. What the research paper showed, and I can't imagine it's the first research paper to show this kind of level of vulnerability and exploitation, but what it did show is that, for example, if I'm able to exploit something over Bluetooth, I can use a shared memory attack, for example, that gets me into the Wi-Fi, and I can kind of jump between them because these different
that's kind of
aspects
cool.
of this, right? That's cool. Like that to me is an interesting kind of threat model that like all the Wi-Fi communications that might be built in on a phone, you might also have NFC in other devices, even laptops, right? That might have these components to save cost. They put them on the same chip, but they share resources. And it's that shared resource that it can allow you to jump from, I'm going to compromise your laptop over Wi-Fi, but then be able to exploit something on the Bluetooth chip, which I think is really interesting.
And this isn't in just a small amount of Bluetooth chips. Like you're talking about billions because it's affecting ESP32, which is used in most Bluetooth and Wi-Fi SoC chips as part of it. It's what was it? It's Bracktooth. That's what the vulnerability is called, if I remember right. I actually spoke about this on Newsy this last week or the week before, and your ability, like this is not being fixed by a lot of manufacturers. You look at many of the manufacturers I speak about on the show, the manufacturers, based on who they are either addressing it or not addressing it based on the level of risk and consumers that are asking for a fix. Most consumers are not. This allows an attacker to do a denial of service, shut down the Bluetooth on any given phone at any point in time and not bring it back up. You can continually do denial of service against Bluetooth devices.
Over Wi-Fi.
Over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, like close proximity or over Wi-Fi, sending individual packets. Very, very simple attack, pretty straightforward as far as the buffer overflow and how it actually works. It injects code into the system and could potentially allow a remote code execution for some of the out-of-bounds memory attacks if it is proven successful.
But also knocking someone off their Bluetooth or Wi-Fi could lead to other attacks too. Many of those attacks we've studied over the years rely on intercepting the initial communications or handshake protocols, right, in Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. So this I could see being really handy. Like, can't get on the Wi-Fi or whatever, or can't communicate via Bluetooth, but I can go over Wi-Fi. I can make your Bluetooth cord disconnect, and when it reconnects to me because of some other kind of attack. Yep.
You think about all the setup guides. You look at something like Ubiquity. You look at Alexa. You look at a lot of the Nest devices. All the IoT devices are relying on near field or Bluetooth in order to do the initial setup. And if you can actually reset those or spoof those initial connections and do a denial of service against the original equipment, your ability to then manipulate and connect back to things like a phone over Bluetooth without having to request a pairing. Like I may mention, like with Inside the Research, they're saying you don't have to do an initial pairing in order for this denial of service attack to be effective. That's a pretty big attack. Like I don't have to do anything. It's almost like a non-interactive zero-day exploit from SMS, like the Pegasus stuff we've seen. You don't have to connect or pair to this device for it to kick off Bluetooth and do a denial of service and reset your Bluetooth chip.
Will they use Bluetooth to do the initial setup to give it the Wi-Fi information so the IoT device can connect to the Wi-Fi? Like I've seen a lot. My Christmas tree is connected to Wi-Fi. Like I have an app on my phone. I can change my Christmas tree. Which is hilarious.
Well, it's either that or they'll set up the Wi-Fi on the device as an access point, point to point, and then it uses that to send the information over, and then you're back to regular.
Yeah.
Same effect though. Right.
Even if you're just resetting the chip though, and not allowing, like without pairing to a device, like anything within inside of my range, I put something in the vicinity and I do not allow anything to connect to my phone via Bluetooth, and I do a denial of service, like you've got a manufacturing issue where phones get returned and now you've got a mass influx of device issues, which is an entirely different tack from a denial of service side. Like ESP32 is in a lot of stuff, not just IoT. You're talking MacBooks, you're talking iPhones, you're talking Android. Right. All the protocol stacks have the ability to be denied access to any Bluetooth. You think about all the users that you walk by them and disconnect their AirPods and their device has to reboot in order for them to reconnect. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty bad day if that gets out in the public.
Yeah, my Nest Protects go through, the smoke detectors go through a similar handshake kind of process.
They do.
It's kind of scary.
The other interesting thing is some of those things, when they lose their connection, they go back into pairing mode.
Yep.
Or if you've got a guy who's never configured one and you just happen to be in range, well, have at. It's pretty easy to take control of it.
That initial setup mode, right, typically does not have any authentication or anything like that.
Yep. Especially if it's an older protocol, like you're talking about Bluetooth 2 or Bluetooth Classic, one of those older protocols where the chip may be a little bit older and all it takes is a full disconnect and reset. Like now You're talking about the ability to take over hardware.
Yeah.
Any other security stories? I think we covered most of them. Oh, no, I wanted to cover this one because I thought it was interesting. A German-made VoIP system. Researchers found there were 2 backdoor passwords in firmware. One that was set for a secret user. The other can be used as a high privilege user for admin. There was no way was discovered to disable these backdoors. This class of vulnerabilities is very scary to me. When I was researching IoT devices heavily, when Larry and I were writing the book, I kind of highlighted this in maybe the book, but also in a lot of other talks I gave at the time of not devices that had a backdoor that the user just could not reset, right? Like in the web interface, in whatever management protocols they provided on the device, you couldn't wipe out this backdoor.
It's a maintenance hook.
It's a maintenance hook. It's just in there. It's baked in the
ICS
firmware.
and OT has always been notorious for this, and it's horrible. Like, seeing this in a phone,
scary to me.
Bad.
Like you can put all the security around the firmware, and you can apply all the firmware updates, but that backdoor, if someone gains access to that protocol, is something you can't change. You can't change the password. You can't disable the backdoor from a user perspective. Sure, you could reverse engineer the firmware, disassemble it, go in and change it and put it all back together. That's not always feasible. Sometimes you could do that, but you need a very sophisticated user to be able to reverse engineer the firmware.
Yeah, it's not even always feasible.
If it's even possible. Like sometimes it's just not possible to do that and get working firmware when it comes back. Then you run the risk of breaking the device. And to me, this type of backdoor is a huge security risk.
It's very old school.
You have to ask yourself, is this a supply chain issue where they just had development code where they were testing, they got pushed to prod that is poor quality assurance? Is this something that was pushed by the manufacturer for a backdoor for technical support and didn't think about security implications? Is this a backdoor pushed by the manufacturer for government leveraged capabilities via pressure? You think about the stuff that China's pushing, this is something that is very feasible that could be pushed from a Chinese manufacturer. Just because it's in Germany, I would less suspect German authorities from putting this in there for their access. They're very privacy conscious and they do things in a much more conservative manner. But these are things that you should be looking at your supply chain, your code repositories, your CDIC pipeline, how those codes are pushed, why this is there. And I would be going kind of full panic mode from a tinfoil hat standpoint of we've got a backdoor in our code. Why is this here? And who put this here? And how did this get past QA?
My favorite example is Joel's backdoor. Search for D-Link Joel's backdoor. Read that whole history of that. I put it in my presentations back in the day. It's a crazy story. The Russians had found it. It was a user agent string. It was Joel's backdoor backwards, right, Tyler? Was that the I think that if in your user agent string, Joel's backdoor spelled backwards was like the magic string.
Instant magic string.
People used to put stuff like that in stuff all the time. I mean, engineers put stuff like that in university systems all the time so they could get back in after people locked themselves out and all kinds of stuff like that.
One of my favorite quotes, Mr. Potato Head, backdoors are not secrets. What movie is that from? Anyone know?
War Games.
War Games. Thank you, Lee.
War Games.
I think it's one of my favorite scenes and lines, right? He's like, Mr. Potato Head, Mr. Potato Head, backdoors are not secrets.
Yeah. Look, I've got
which
one
is very telling because they're not, right? Like, someone's going to find it. Someone's going to find it. Yeah.
Especially today.
I've got one question for you, Paul, though. But did your discovery of Joel's backdoor have anything to do with the Thanksgiving incident?
They were unrelated. Joel's backdoor came way before the Thanksgiving incident. I know our listeners hate it when we talk about inside jokes like that, and I apologize. But
I know it's terrible.
I will not disclose ever that that particular inside joke.
That is the last episode you'll be seeing, Joff, as a co-host.
No, that's totally
Thank you,
fine.
Joff, for joining us.
It is an
and Joff will no longer
inside
be here
joke.
for 2021.
So
I did want to talk about one funny story. I find these crazy stories with kind of interesting. Sometimes they're better than others. This one had us using a word that we all kind of like forgot was in the English language and really like using. So I implore everyone over the holiday table, if you can work in the word precopulatory.
Mm-hmm.
That would
awesome.
be that's a great one, right? That's a great like hacker challenge. Like work in the word precopulatory
At your family dinner.
at your family dinner,
you'll
and like
need
let
to
me know
use-
how that goes.
Can I add a Fauci to that? A precopulatory. I can't even say it.
Copulatory, precopulatory.
Precopulatory diminution.
Yes.
If you've got to get those together, I think you're in great shape.
Get double points for that.
I don't like. You wonder how I come across this story that says precopulatory oral sex found in Darkling beetles.
I've been wondering that all night.
I don't know. I really don't know.
You don't
how
want
I
to see
find
his
this
search
stuff.
history.
Yeah, you don't want my browser history. So a team of researchers from China, the UK, and the US. So this is a multinational research that's looking at
Multinational, more than one person.
the sexual behavior of Darkling beetles. Now, I had also not heard of Darkling beetles before.
But you know about them now.
But I know about them now. I'm like the expert on
They're
them.
slamming, yeah, I mean-
they look like beetles.
They're like the sluts of the beetle world.
I don't know if they're necessarily sluts.
No, they are
they're
50
very,
shades
they're
of
very
gray
picky.
beetles.
Yeah, they're very
We
picky.
secretly hacked Paul's
That's a
media
that's a
collection
magic
service to
mic
change what the criteria would result in.
So the researchers know, like this article, like I can't believe that there's people on this earth that study this to this level because they have this information about invertebrates, right? That is just so they say males giving females oral genital stimulation is rare in invertebrates. But like someone had to put that in as like a fact in an article. Someone had to study that.
And I had one more image for you from this because I've been in these meetings, not about this, but I've been in these other kind of meetings where there was like all these people sitting around a table, right? And
Talking about a subject.
It's this very esoteric thing.
Yes.
And there's a translator sitting there who's having to translate precopulatory oral sex behavior into
Right.
like 3 different languages. And they're like frantically looking through their dictionary of words going, what did he just say?
But like someone had to write the sentence, they were surprised when they found male darkling desert beetles contacting and orally manipulating female genitalia multiple times prior to copulation.
Man, that was a big night in the lab, let me tell you. Somebody was like, holy shit, look what I'm seeing here. Oh my God. He's going for it. He's going for it. Okay, here we go.
A holiday meal. I'm thinking about my holiday meal with the family going, well, hi, daughter. How are you? Have you ever Googled precopulatory
oral sex
diminution on your
behavior in
iPad.
Darkling Beetle.
tell
There's another
you about
aspect.
Darkling
There's
Beetles.
another aspect here that was just mind blowing to this whole thing. So they say during oral stimulation, the females appeared to judge its effectiveness. If she was not satisfied, she would end things by lowering her rear end and walking away, and like not completing the mating process. I'm like, what? Like someone actually studied this to basically like, if the oral sex from the male wasn't good, the female's like, yeah, I'm out. Like, you're not what it says in the article is like the female determined that was not a suitable mate to produce offspring, and therefore like that was it.
Somewhere there's like a lab book, on somebody's desk, and they've written notes in it, like, lowered rear end, walked away, oral sex ineffective.
Yes. Someone studied this. Someone had to observe all of this and like go through the scientific process of observing this. But then talking about, like, there were meetings where people talked about
probably a conference,
this whole process, like conceivably with a straight face, which is way more we could do here. Like, I could not talk about this with a straight face. Like, it's hilarious.
Precopulatory Con is being held in Bern, Switzerland next month. So if you want to check it out, it's
a researcher stated,
time.
and I'll quote from the article, unsuccessful oral stimulation typically led to unsuccessful mating attempts. Like, someone had to write that and probably talk about that in a meeting.
And then there was probably an academic argument about it.
Work, baby. The more you know.
Yeah, we can't solve global warming. I don't know.
Yeah. If it just had more precopulatory behavior, if the hurricane had better precopulatory behavior, we would get better.
It wouldn't be post-copulatory cock-blocked.
Oral copulation also serves as a test of sorts, allowing females to better judge who would produce superior offspring. On your holiday break, I want you to contemplate that.
Just think of it as evolution in action.
Evolution in action.
So yeah.
I mean, I feel like this should be like taught in schools.
And just try to remember those beetle mouth parts, and it'll give you.
I try not to think about that in the context of this article.
It turns out the Beetle scientists probably do get laid.
Science is science, man, and this is a very, very specific application of science.
I assure you there's etymologists who are just as passionate about this stuff as you are about soldering.
Right? Yeah, like this is...
I mean, we talk about really bizarre esoteric stuff all the time. It doesn't have precopulatory behavior in it, but,
This goes back to the science of, like, precopulation is fundamental in all walks of life. It doesn't matter what vertical you're in.
But it sounds like a Far Side cartoon.
I'm seeing Tyler with a big shovel right now in a large hole opening up.
So I mean, that article's there for...
That probably wraps the year up pretty well.
Year up on that note. I
think that sort of slams the lid on
science
2021.
Never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah.
It's... I think, I don't know, I helped my teenage son with his science homework, and we're talking about the oranges of the moon. I think that if you were to try to teach this to 8th graders, you might have, that would be a challenge.
I know I'm going home and ordering some Darkling Beetles in the mail.
Right? Tell me what your research results
we'll be experimenting with that all during the break. So
that's it.
I'm reevaluating my life choices right now.
I think you should. You might even get some tips in this article.
Well, that will conclude this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you in the new year. Happy holidays, everyone. Over.
Happy holidays.
And out.
Woohoo!